So hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. My name is Antoine Damiens and I'm a postdoc fellow at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. So today I'm going to be talking about tiny ephemeral queer film festivals, archival research, and how it can help us think about the political project and the methodologies of festival studies. Just before we start, this intervention today is partly based on the first chapter of my book, LGBTQ Film Festival Curating Queerness, which just came out with Amsterdam University Press. Ta-da! So I'm gonna go into that in a minute, but the book is partly based on the archival research I did as part of my PhD dissertation, which really forced me to ask the epistemological question about festival studies. So my book is basically trying to do a querying of festival studies, and I don't really have enough time to go into it, but you've got the main arguments on the screen, and I'm more than happy to talk about it in the Q&A by email or, to talk about it, basically. So today, I'm gonna be thinking about the knowledge we as scholars produce on and with film festival. So to that end, my intervention is explicitly built as a critique of what feminist scholars would call the field imaginary of festival studies. And so that's a concept I'm borrowing from Robin Wigman, and I'm gonna be using a lot of feminist scholars because we can never use too many feminist scholars. So specifically, I'm gonna be interested in two interrelated issues, which is first, how do festivals' archival practices shape the narrative we as scholars find about festivals? And secondly, how can we understand the gaps in the archive as productive, as revealing the political project of festival studies? So, over the past few years, I've been doing extensive archival research on queer film festival in institutional, community-based, and personal collection in Canada, France, and in the USA. So quite a variety of archive. And I've been struck by the number of festivals which have been forgotten in traditional historical narratives and which oftentimes only exist as traces or ghosts in the archives, sometimes even as undated flyers. So that's what I'm calling the festivals that did not matter. And of course, some of them were quite important, so I don't mean to diminish them. For instance, I'm talking a lot in the book about French gay liberation film festivals organized in the mid-1970s. And these festivals, first of all, predate Frameline, San Francisco, 1977, which is one of the oldest queer film festivals, but most importantly, helped changing censorship legislation in France. I'm also talking a lot about festivals organized in gay porn theaters in the early 1970s, and that's among the first ways of exhibiting queer cinema, so it's actually super historically significant. About festivals organized by independent theaters, and here my favorite example is the first American gay film festival organized in 1973, so super early once again by the Janus Theater in Washington, DC, which I used to confuse with the 1978 first gay film festival organized this time by the American Film Institute in DC. And so there was actually quite a bit of first gay film festival, and it's super funny to try to find out which one was which one and to not confuse them. Super important because it's a full chapter of my book about the history of gay and lesbian film studies through festivals organized by emerging scholars, film studies department, and gay student association. And so in the background, it's actually a festival organized by my PhD advisor in the mid-1970s. So that's only a couple of examples. I could talk about thousands and thousands of tiny queer film festivals, but the question is basically, why don't we write scholarship about them? And here I think there is two ways of answering that question. So the first has to do with archival policies, and the second with festival studies as a field of academic research. So I'm gonna go fast on archival policy because time, but I think as scholars, we need to interrogate the power dynamics at the heart of the archive. So I'm basically gonna be doing 5 bullet points, and I can talk more about them afterwards if you want, but beginning of explanation really. So the first one is that festivals oftentimes rely on what Schkeldt-Deloist describes as precarious cultural work. And we all know that, but oftentimes it's a team of volunteers organized in a basement. And so documents have been lost or haven't been kept simply enough because precarious volunteer work. Second explanation, some of these festivals have no connection to archives and to academia, and that's really true of festivals organized, for instance, in gay-porn theaters. And here I really think as scholars, we need to think about why particular festivals are always talked about. And I have a tiny story about that. I went to Mix New York for the first time a couple of years ago. It's one of the most important queer film festivals. And after a screening, I was trying to talk to festival goers and to flirt with two boys. And the festival director spotted me. We started talking about my project. And the next day, I had a full set of catalogs. So Mix New York is actually quite conscious of the need to archive its history, partly because it was created by people who were part of ACT UP New York. And so with the idea of HIV/AIDS and archiving of the need to preserve the lives of people who were dying. So I'm not mentioning that to critique the festival. I love this catalog so much, but just to illustrate that some festivals have no connection and don't particularly want to be talked about, and other festivals are really keen on being archived and talked about, and we need to keep that in mind when we're doing scholarship. Third explanation, it has to do with the history of gay and lesbian archiving. And so here I don't have time to develop, but just like with a lot of minority archive, it's quite recent, and archiving has been linked to particular social movements. So we need to keep in mind when an archive was created, the type of ethos it was created with, and why it's preserving particular documents and not others. Fourth explanation, it has to do with the organization of archival collection. Archive, by the definition, are about historiography, they organize knowledge. So oftentimes we need to think about why particular documents ended up in some folders and not others. It's quite important for archives that are organized in organizational file and subject files, because typically these two modes of organization do not correspond to tiny ephemeral festival. So lastly, we need to think about the material reality of archiving. Once again, a lot of community archives are run by volunteers. They don't have money, so documents can be lost or can be not classified, and we need to keep that in mind in a generous way. Okay, so second explanation, it has to do with the constitution of festival studies as a field of academic research. And by that, I mean the sedimentation of scholarship that led to a field of festival studies, and that actually conditions the type of scholarship we create. So once again, not a lot of time, so I'm gonna give 3 theories, and I'm more than happy to expand on them in the Q&A. The first one has to do with the type of history festival studies is doing. So when we look at the scholarship on film festival, most historical narratives are about tracing the development of the festival circuit. So it's always what I'm calling developmentalist history, about a couple of festivals being organized first, then multiplying and constituting a circuit and network, being interconnected and shaping the economy of film. So of course, this scholarship is super important, and I'm not trying to diminish it in any way, but this type of developmentalist history is focusing on particular types of festival, and of course ignores festivals which happen only a couple of times, which aren't connected to the circuit, which are quite different, and so on and so on. Second sort of explanation, it has to do with festival studies as a new field of academic research, and the ways in which we, as scholars, have struggled to establish the legitimacy of festival studies. So I think in film studies and communication studies, we are constantly asked to justify why festival matters, why we focus on film festivals, and so by doing so, we are also defining which festivals actually matter. So it's quite easy to see in the literature on queer film festival and on particular types of festival in general, but oftentimes we start with claims saying that, oh, our festivals are important because they're among the largest ones in any given city. And it's a claim a lot of scholars are making. It's a true claim. I'm not trying to diminish it once again, but of course, the ways in which we have to justify our object of studies is orienting us towards particular type of festivals that quote unquote matter. Third explanation, and it's linked, most of our theoretical concepts in festival studies are presupposing a particular definition of what a film festival is. And I know it's counterintuitive because oftentimes festival studies refuses to define what a film festival is. But if we look at notions such as the circuit, networks, and I'm taking these two because they're the most important ones, Of course, we have a particular definition of what a festival is, and we tend to focus on festivals that quote unquote fit the bill. So that's only a couple of explanations, once again, 10 minutes, but my larger project and the book that is about trying to find ways of thinking about this ephemeral film festival in a productive way and using them to rethink the theoretical frameworks and methodological project of festival studies. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the Q&A.